Hey guys, welcome back. Week number 4, Grow Time, Hydroponics and Supply. This week we're going to cover seed starting. One of my favorites. It took me a while to master it. It seems to be the hardest for those that are just getting started with hydroponics. So I'm going to wait just a few moments. Hopefully we'll get a few people on with us today. I'm going to try and pull up the comments. But welcome back. Oh, wait, just... Alright, we got another one. We got 2. Welcome, get comfy. A snack, of course. I always encourage the snacks. And while we're waiting for a few more people, let me grab my bucket of water. I'll be right back. Alright, so I'm actually going to go ahead and get started. This will be recording, hopefully, whoever wants to learn more about seeds will find the recording, they'll see it soon. So welcome, live number 4, starting your own seedlings. We're going to talk about a few different ways to start your seedlings in hydroponics. We're going to talk about pH, adjusting your pH, and you might have heard that term before, maybe in relation to like a pool, if you've ever heard testing the pH on your pool. It's just making sure your water and your acidity level and everything's in check. And you have to do that for your plants as well. So first, let's take a look at some of the different grow mediums that we're going to deal with today. So the most popular in hydroponics, and the one I actually started with, is called Rockwool. So it looks like this. It's these tiny little cube-like, it almost looks like insulation, but it's not. The really cool thing about this is that it lasts. You can reuse it. It's also not a cool thing if you are conscientious of the environment, so that can kind of go both ways, but Rockwool is very inexpensive, a good way to do a large scale of plants, pretty cheap. We're going to talk about my favorite, which is, we've got the Rapid Rooter plugs. I've also got some Root Riot plugs, which are pretty similar. They're peat moss plugs, and there's like a polymer glue that kind of keeps it all together. It looks kind of like a little dirt pod, and the reason I like these is that the pH is good to go. So with the Rockwool, we'll talk about this soon, you have to adjust the pH. It naturally has a high pH around 7 or 8, which isn't good for your plants. Let's say you're doing like leafy greens, vegetables, things like that. Even peppers, they normally like a pH around anywhere from 6 to 6.5, maybe at the most 7. So the thing with Rockwool is that you actually have to bring down that pH level before you get going. So let's kind of start that first. Let's grab our bucket of water right here. You're going to take your pH meter. We sell these here in the shop. And it kind of turns on. It's got a little digital reader. You stick that down in the water, it'll tell you where it's at. We use reverse osmosis water here at the shop, so that kind of means it's basically stripped of everything. It goes down to the very basics of the water. It's sitting at around 7, and again, we need to bring down the pH level. So how do we do that? If our Rockwool cubes are at 7 or 8, we'll want to make our water a 5.5 pH, and how you can do that is with your pH up, your pH down. So they look just like this. We sell these in the store as well. Take your little beaker. It only takes just a little bit, so it's important to kind of start out small and go from there. It's also important that once you start pouring your pH in there, you're going to want to give it a moment to actually mix together before you test it. It's not immediately going to read the pH level that you want, rather. So we'll let that sit around and mix it a little bit. I went a little too far. I went down to right at 5. So I'm going to go ahead and just use a little bit of the pH of it. Actually takes even a less amount. test it again. It is kind of all about patience, but the good news is once you get it down and once you know what levels you need your pH to be at, it starts to become a lot easier. So that's the good news. All right, we are about in our range. We'll go ahead and turn that off. Next, you take your Rockwool cubes, you break them up. I prefer to break them up ahead of time. That way when you're pulling them out, they're individual pieces already. You're not worried about it when it's wet. So we'll go ahead and get those going and we'll move on to something else. And we'll come back. This will probably be one of the longer videos just because there is so much detail to seed starting. But that's okay. I hope you're enjoying your Tuesday night too. So we'll let those mix up. They're down in our bucket. Set them to the side. And let's get back to our Rapid Rooter plug. So Rapid Rooter, like I mentioned, it's a peat moss plug. Looks like this. Very similar. It's going to be your Root Riot. Made by a different company, pretty much the same thing. The difference being that this one has a tray that comes with it. It's a 10 by 20 tray. 10 by 20, that's why it's called that. Inside of here is basically a brace for all the pieces, kind of like this. And the plugs just sit down real nice and neat and easy in there. We are going to use some Rapid Rooter plugs, so they are actually some Root Riot plugs. So they're actually already individualized. So we're going to take them, drop them right down where they need to go. You can soak these in a mild nutrient solution before you get going. We'll talk more about nutrients in a few weeks. For me, I kind of wanted to just leave that for a little later on because it can be more difficult. But we'll get these plugs in here. All right. Something that is really, really important that I need to find is it's always important to mark what you're growing. You might think that you'll remember what seeds you've planted and where you've planted them. But as soon as your tray gets turned around or your sprouts come out looking like you did not expect, I would actually suggest that you just mark them. That way you already know what's going to be there. So today we're going to do some kale, we're going to do some Swiss chard, cilantro, and parsley. Could you use water to even out the pH as well? Yeah, you could. It depends on what kind of water you're using. I don't recommend your tap water, especially city water. It has a lot of additives, chlorine, things that aren't good for your plants. But like something like the reverse osmosis, yeah, I mean, you could, if it's got a higher pH than something you're already working with, you could use it to kind of balance it out. Yeah, and I see a comment from Stacy. So the plugs we're using here, they stay actually a little more moist whenever you're working with them, whereas the other ones I showed you in the tray, the Root Riot, to me these are a little more spongy. It means that when you're first getting started, you have to water them a little more. You have to pay them a little bit more of attention, which is okay. But ideally, you want to spend less time on things, not more, right? So we'll label these up. Cilantro. My pen isn't working. I think I can get by though. We got parsley. Swiss chard. And the last one will be kale. So we got our steaks in here. Next, you actually take your seeds, right? So we got cilantro first. I like to put more seeds in my pod than I think I will actually use. The reason being, it's always easy to thin out later rather than risk not having a pod germinate. You know, at the end of the day, these are probably not going to want to be reused after they've been sitting under the sun and the heat lamp, you know, for a few days and moist and things like that. So I would encourage you to overplant. And what I mean by that is I normally will drop a few right down in the middle, and then I'll open up sides, and I'll show you what I mean by that. I'll kind of poke new holes in these. So I take my tweezers, kind of like that, make a few extra holes, and I'll drop my seeds down in there. Good comment, Stacey. Yeah, you looked it up, the tap water is over 8. So that's actually not good. That means you have hard water. We do have a solution though. If you're working with city water and it's what you've got and it's what you've got to deal with, we have nutrient solutions that will help kind of cancel all that out. One of them is called the General Hydroponics Flora Series, and your micro set of nutrients you can have for hard water. So that means you don't have filtered or distilled water. It's also really important to note that you can do your own distilled water. If you take water like rainwater and you collect it in buckets or giant bins, from there you can actually set it outside in the sun for 24 hours, and all that chlorine and all that nasty stuff will dissipate out of it, and what you'll be left with is distilled water basically. Go ahead and continue on here. I'm going to do a few more cilantro pods, and then we'll go ahead and move on. I want to actually talk to you about a few other items that I've got listed over here, which are also important in the seedling stage. Cilantro is by far my new favorite. Having this sprout for the first time, the smell is just, you can't really compare it to anything. I love trimming it, taking home the leftovers, cooking with it fresh. You just really can't beat it. I recommend when you're putting the seeds into whatever medium you're using, like you use Twizzlers or like tweezers or toothpicks or something. Are you putting those down in the center? Yeah, I am. I put them down in the middle of the plug. Let me pull one out that doesn't have anything in it. So each of these plugs has a hole right here. So I put a few down in the center, but I also will kind of open up and make like new holes around each side of it. Like I said, I like to overplant, and then I will kind of, from there, thin it down as I need. Sometimes if it's like the herbs and stuff, you can put a lot in one pod and you can get as much as you can out of your space. If it's not gonna hurt the plant, I mean, why not? Trying to read these comments. Can you put just the roots in the center? Yeah, so these are actually good for cloning. And cloning, if you don't know what that is you take a mature plant and you cut off, a branch of it. You split it and kind of make a new plant out of that little cutling. And I mentioned this in our last video, but this is your RapidStart. You can use that as like a rooting agent to get roots. Stick it right down in these little pods. Another option is, this is the Clonex brand, and it actually goes well with the Riot plugs. You can spray your whatever plant you're going to take it from. It gives us all the nutrients and everything that you would need to make sure you have a strong plant to start with. You need something strong to start with, or your new plant isn't going to be strong. And then this is a rooting gel. You dip the tip of it in there and you just plug it right into one of these pods. Same concept would apply. Instead of starting from a seed, now you've got a plant that's actually mature. Something to note about clones is whenever you take the cutling from the mother plant, that's how old your new little tiny plant is. So it's not a seedling by any definition. It's actually probably flowering at that point. All right. So we talked about pH. We'll talk more about that later on a different video. There's also EC. So you'll want to measure that and make sure that you're not too high. Really, Google's your friend. Look up what kind of plant you're growing. I deal a lot with like lettuce and things like that, and leafy like green stuff. And I believe 650 is the EC that we're shooting for. With that, let's talk a little bit about some of these other items that we've got. So I mentioned earlier we have the 1020 tray. So you can actually make your own, like if you're using Rockwool instead of these starter plugs, you can take something like this that'll hold it up. You get your Rockwool when it's done soaking, you put it right in there and it'll hold itself up. Which actually, speaking of, our Rockwool is probably done. So I'll go ahead and grab one of those. Just because I want to show you how to deal with Rockwool. So once you get it out, it's going to be really, really wet. You want to take it and not squeeze it, but rather just like shake it. You want to get all that loose excess water out without like damaging the pod, right? And that's important because that's where your roots are going to go. So they need space to, you know, crawl and move. So that goes in there just like that. Another one. Shake, shake. The only other thing I do different with Rockwool, when I'm done planting the seed, I'll take an excess piece, just a little piece like this, and I'll cover it up. The reason being, when your seeds are germinating, they need dark. I actually go ahead and I put my seedlings under the light as soon as I'm done planting them because they're covered up. They get enough dark, and when they sprout through, they have already got that light there, so they're not reaching for it. They're not leggy. We talked about that last time. Whenever I get to the end and I've got all my seeds planted, I actually cover them with this. This is a Coco Perlite mix. Perlite is these white little beads that you find in like potting soil. It gives it aeration. So the cool thing about Coco mix with Perlite especially is you can water it a ton without risking like drenching your plants or overwatering them rather, which can kill them. Plants can actually drown. They have, you know, air roots and stuff, and you don't want to keep those covered for too long. They're usually towards the top of the trunk. So I'll take those, for instance, this cilantro is all planted, and I'll cover it up just like that. Gives it some dark, it simulates the dirt, makes your plants have to poke through an extra little layer, which means they're going to be stronger for you when you're ready to transplant them. Voila, I've only done one side. I'll finish these seeds up later. We've got a few options as far as you know, how to hold up your plugs. Like I showed you the one that I use in the store. We sell something very similar. This is a humidity dome, so once you've planted your seeds, you'll want to put something like this on top of it to create kind of like a greenhouse effect. Do certain plants prefer a certain seed starting medium over another? Not necessarily. I think it's just a personal preference as far as you as the grower. So I think Rockwool is the most commonly used in hydroponics because it's cheap. It can be scaled. So a lot of greenhouses will use it. Big operations will use it. So I think that's the only thing to really think about is what's your cost. Something like this, these end up being maybe 75 cents each. Versus something like the Rockwool, you get a sheet of these things. Let me show you what a whole sheet looks like. So these are 2-inch starter plugs. You can get a whole sheet of these for 15 bucks. So they're much cheaper. This is a 2-inch plug, so it's a little bit bigger. The other really cool thing about Rockwool, while it's not my favorite, they can kind of be stacked, so you can get bigger Rockwool cubes, and as your roots get bigger, you can literally just stack them and keep going, and the roots will keep growing. Similarly, we have the smaller plugs, which is what I deal with. It's a 1 inch, I believe. Yeah, 1.5 inch, pretty standard. What you have to think about when you're picking a Rockwool plug is, what are you gonna do with it eventually? What kind of a net cup is it going to be in? Is it going to be a 2-inch, a 3-inch net cup? Or are you going to put it in other Rockwool cubes? So that will kind of help you determine what size of the Rockwool. And if I have missed any comments, I do apologize. I'm looking. I think I've done good. So we've got this. I think I left off saying that you need to create kind of like a greenhouse effect. And this is a humidity dome. You can kind of cover up the little holes that you see here, and it will create a greenhouse. It's pretty much Gainesville in a box right here. And after a few days, you'll start seeing sprouts. And when you see your sprouts, you can kind of open up the top here. You can give it a little bit of air. From there, you'll slowly want to prop it open. You don't want to immediately just remove the lids. You can shock the plants, which isn't good either. So once I see sprouts, I'll open up the top for about a day. I'll open the top like this for a day, and I'll kind of rest it on something like this. Like when it's actually down in there, it's kind of stable. I'll rest it like that. I'll put a fan so it's got some air movement. And then maybe on the second or third day after your sprouts, you can remove it. At that point, they're good to go. You want to get them closer to the light. Alright, so a few things that are very important when you're growing. First and foremost, a seed mat. I might have been stretching when I said that. I don't know if you heard me, but a seedling heat mat. So seeds actually like it pretty warm. A lot of seeds will not germinate if you get below 70. I set my seedling heat mat at, I believe, 78. But different plants like different things. On my seed mat is just different plants, common plants that you might be growing and what temperature they like it at. But that's also readily available on, like, the internet, on Google, you know, temperature of seeds when they're germinating, and it'll give you a list of whatever you're growing. It'll go from there. I also want to show you guys some seeds that are already started. Let me clean up a little bit. Alright, so this tray. Started this tray 2 weeks ago. It's been picked at. We've had some people come in and buy some pods. Over here, these nice big tall ones, these are cherry tomatoes. They are getting really tall. I need to get them out of there. We've got some cucumbers. These are the big leafy ones. These will eventually start climbing. So cucumbers like to climb a trellis. They get pretty big. Cherry tomatoes, they will need some support eventually, just like regular tomatoes, something like a cage to make sure it won't fall over. We've got catnip. You saw full-grown catnip, but this is baby catnip. We've got sage. Sage does really well in the Florida heat. That's pretty cool. And then over here we've got some peppers that we started for somebody. Something really cool that we're proud to do and we'd love to do more of is the seed starting can be really hard. So if there's something you want started, we'll do that for you. Give us a call. Let us know what you want. We'll make sure it's nice and strong. And last but not least, I'm going to take you over to the germination station. Let's go look at the lights and how I have it set up over there, and let's see how the heat mat is actually plugged up. Alright. Alright, the infamous germination station. So again, we start seeds for people. If somebody came in and this is what they wanted. They wanted Bib lettuce, romaine, iceberg, spinach, and some sweetie tomatoes. These are slicing tomatoes, thyme in the back. But I wanted you to see this heat mat. And what I mean by like the temperature, it'll tell you, you know, how long it would take for your germination, what temperature is best. But the really cool thing that I like is it's automated. So you set whatever temperature you want it to be. There's this little probe. Let's see if I can find it. Back here. And it's just a thermometer. Tells you what temperature it is and then it heats it to whatever it needs to be. But the other thing is, like, we talked about lights last week. So check it. These, you know, these starter guys, they weren't tall enough. I started them down here on the heat mat, and when I needed that space, I moved them up here, but they weren't close enough to the light, so I put them on top of another tray so they could get a little closer. The good thing about that is they're not going to reach for the light. That means they're going to be nice and strong and healthy and short and bushy. If you're growing like vegetative things, that's really important. You want it to be short and bushy. You don't want it to be, you know, tall and falling over. That's not going to give you what you want. Checking the comments now.